are these people?
So,
yeah,
I could have some of it.
Now I don't know if you heard this, but over at INN, we not only cover news, we've also got a musical director who is a resident genius, singer, songwriter. He also writes some spoken word. And I don't know if you've seen this, heard this. I wanted to play it for you. It's 3.5 minutes. He wrote a spoken word piece called Super Sight, Children of the Fuselage. That's all about East Palestine and what's happened to you guys. And I if you hadn't heard, I wanted to play it for you and for everyone else that's watching. So let me do that real quick, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
100,000 pounds of vinyl chloride burned into the air and in the water with your fluoride. Today we'll demonstrate the role that profit plays in cost-benefit analysis to find the worth of your lives. Mind you, we'll be grading on a curve that traces dead fish on the shoreline. Today, the town of East Palestine will know the skies of wartime, wear the shoes of Palestine, and know the smell of war crimes. Their pets and livestock will be corpses for the war shrine. This is how you sanction all your farmland in the Fourth Reich. I'm honestly surprised that Pete addressed it in a fortnight. He praised the first responders, but ignored the looming morgue line. Like focus on the cavalry, ignore that every horse died. Never mind there's not a single cricket, bird, or horsefly, just triclops in the triage tent who expedite the four-eyed. Norfolk taking pages out the Northwoods, north side, add a dash of NORAD, plant a row of soil mines, give them lots of black skies and water bright with oil shine, and you can propagate the kind of crop that Gates will normalize. Save your time and give up ever going back to normal life. Norfolk cut its cost, and now this nation pays the morbid price. Norfolk waived the loss as purely human, so they rolled the dice, knowing Biden had their backs when workers tried to unionize, knowing all their lobbyists assure they won't be scrutinized, and knowing that the tiny little fine they might be hit with is a part of doing business when your business is to euthanize, to salt the earth, liquidate the brutalized, drench the plains in acid rain, and blame it all on rural minds. Tell them that's just what they get for voting red, and old Team Blue will fall in step and shake their heads and disconnect from humankind. They're never looking up, their fingers point to you and I. Thanks to years of being trained to frame the little guy. They've seen the film enough to tell you where the blame should lie. The poorest family's EBT card was the mastermind. Those little houses won't concern the liberal passerby. They had their dose of NPR. The passive-voiced will cast aside your raspy breath and swollen eyes, your burning cough that won't subside, your cat that didn't last the night, that pall of death, that blackened sky, the harvest faced in 10 years' time that reaps the waste of wealthy crimes, a million-gallon deep decline through super sites and party lines, through hurried graves and leaded pipes, past poisoned slaves and slaughtered tribes, past forgotten treaties that we authored, then we compromised. Past our moral fabric, ever brittle, gray, and fossilized, past the mass of plastic trash that's just this side of ossified. And if you find one root that thrives, the living proof of fruitful vines, just hold it close, take in the sight, don't plant a host for parasites, who in the name of corporate gain see all that murder justified. We're such a waste of insect paste, and so much cheaper crucified. We're children of the fuselage, ghosts of all the food deprived, echoes of the working class whose Kristallnacht was supersized. Out in Ohio, birds are drowning where they stand. Their eyes reflect a world event that devastates the land, and it's a tale of regulations disemboweled by profit's hand, and their viscera that soaks like so much chloride in the sand.
So that was Jesse Jett's Super Sight. That will be available on Spotify and Bandcamp on Tuesday on a new album that will be released for spoken word. But I did want to play that for you. I didn't know if you'd heard it. He's genius, man. He knows how. Yeah, it hurts. I know. I'm sorry about that. But I thought it was important that, people do care, and they're writing about this, and it is affecting people everywhere. And we are seeing this, and we're trying to scream from the rooftops, at least in independent media, about what's happening. to you and what could happen to any of us. Like I said, this is not anything that is unique to East Palestine. One thing, you mentioned, Alex, that you work with the Rail Workers United. That was something Jesse mentioned about the rail workers getting their contract, the ability to strike was voted down by Congress. Part of this, I know, has to do with the precision scheduled railroading. We have been covering on, how do we miss that, the long-standing issues with the railroad workers and the rail companies, the gouging, the amount of record profits that they've been making while cutting back on the number of crews and what they're doing to the rail workers. Fewer people for more cars every month or every year, it seems. What are you hearing from the people that you're speaking with at RWU?
I'm a solidarity member with RWU. I'm not like part of RWU. I'm not a rail worker, so I can communicate with them. But I'll be honest with you, I've been kind of consumed by this, that I haven't been doing a lot of communication with RWU. But what I do know is that they have been really phenomenal they have released an entire step-by-step process of how to fix the railroads and how to make sure this never happens again. And that's the real issue with this, is that this was so unnecessary. Like, nothing about this was unavoidable. Like, all of this, I'm sorry, you guys are seeing how trashed up my garage is. All of this was entirely, I spoke to someone recently who had knowledge of systems like this. And what he said to me that stuck with me was the train derailed because it could, and because there was no one there who was responsible to make sure it couldn't. And that's basically the summation of it, is these trains are going to keep coming off their rails because we aren't dedicated as a society to make sure that they don't. And as long as we continue to allow these corporations to destroy our society and the ability of our planet and of our soil and our forest to support life, so that they can continue to reap more and more egregious profits just to concentrate them into the hands of a very small group of people. As long as we allow them to do that, they're going to keep doing it. And every way to cut cost is just a way for them to boost their profits, because they can't increase the amount of money they bring in. That is going to stay pretty constant. The only thing they can do to increase the amount of money that they themselves take is to cut costs wherever they can, whereas laying people off, not hiring more, not keeping the number of employees as small as possible, so as not to make sure not to have any of that money be put into the hands of the working class, to cut regulations so as to make sure that all of the costs of safety equipment, of making sure things don't go wrong, that's an unnecessary expenditure into their profits. To make sure that they have as much of the money that comes in and is concentrated into their hands as possible. Everything else is, as said so eloquently in that poem, just the cost of doing business. 100% of everything that is 100% of every single derailment is avoidable. There's not a single train derailment that couldn't be avoided. And every train that does derail only derails because it is allowed to derail, because the measures that can be taken to ensure that it won't be are simply not being taken. And that will continue to happen for as long as we allow it to happen and collectively decide that we're just not going to do anything about it. And that is, I think, something that we can decide not to do.
And who's responsible for the track itself? Because I know that there's that type of complication about, are the private rail companies also responsible for the tracks underneath them, or is that local municipalities, states under federal funding? I'm not even sure, honestly, how that works, but I've been told that it is more complicated than just the rail company paying to fix the actual rails itself, because that involves. Go ahead.
No, go on.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it's actually not that complicated. The railroads are privately owned. That's the real problem, honestly, in my view, is that okay, in any other case of mass national transit, the government, U.S. government, is directly involved, whether it's airlines or freeways and interstates, highways, any kind of rivers, boat, ships from like the oceans, anything where we're bringing in massive amounts of people or supplies. The government is directly involved, and in the case of the railroads, it's not. The United States government is very hands off with the railroads in terms of what they're allowed to do and how they're allowed to operate. They're almost, which is why our railroad systems are so terrible. The United States, because there's no profit. The return on investment of on making sure our railroads are high functioning and are able to distribute resources in a way that allows people to have access to them safely and allows people to travel cheaply, that doesn't benefit the railroad companies. That would be a cost to the railroad companies. Now, it would benefit society. It would benefit the people who live here. It would benefit our ability to move resources from one place to another instead of having to worry about much more expensive and much less efficient things like trucks and airplanes. If we had a rail system that was designed to cheaply and efficiently and safely move product and people from one place to another, but that would require an investment that wouldn't necessarily benefit the railroad companies because it wouldn't help the people who control them reap the most profits, which is their only
motivation is the quarterly profits against Wall Street because of who they're owned by or the fact that they are publicly traded themselves. There were a couple of questions that I had from other INN members. The biggest one was, of course, how can we help? And I think a lot of that has to do with getting the word out as well as the Donor Box website and letting, sharing on social media and donating themselves and getting other people to share and donate.